Oh, it's just the one package. Might even only be one or two items in here. Let's see. Interesting. It's separated, so I should be able to. Yeah, there we go. Once I can find that. Oh yeah, two things. So first we got Girls in Panzer. This is a 1. The finale 1. Das Finale. And as interesting as it would be to watch this, I don't know what I've seen and not seen. Because I at least watched the first season, but I don't know after that. Let's see. I see an English dub. Come on, focus camera. I see a region A. It's a movie on one disc. Beginning of the end. So this is the first movie. Hence one disc. Which is basically the same artwork. Straightforward. And then we have Magical Girl Sight. Complete collection. Huh. I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking at here. Well, let's get this thing out of its plastic first. That was not perfect, but let's see. I see Japanese with English subtitles. Region A. All 12 episodes on 2 discs. Her life was already a living hell. Gaining magical powers made it even worse. It's definitely an interesting sounding concept. Oh dear. That's not very pleasant looking. And she just couldn't give a rat's ass. Well, here's this week's anime Blu-ray collection update. So I watched a couple more episodes of Kakushigoto, and I would have continued watching it, but Friday interrupted things. I've found that this show is a little harder to have as a slightly background show. I feel like it requires more attention for some reason. I can't exactly put my finger on exactly why. I feel like maybe the dialogue is a little trickier, possibly. Trickier compared to some other things I'm talking about or going to reference, of course. But, you know, I've watched 5 or 6 episodes. I'm halfway through, so I'm not giving up on this series just yet. I'm kind of curious where it goes. But I'm not sure if I have much new to really say about it. And, of course, One Piece Season 11 Voyage 4. You know, because, again, for my Friday friend, this is a high priority show, high priority watch, and the only reason I wasn't able to report on it last week was mostly because you know, the timing for when it arrived was not right. Oh well. So, you know, instead, you know, am I thinking of things? Yeah. Because normally I wouldn't have opened it on stream because it would have arrived early enough such that I could have watched it with my Friday friend, even potentially watch it with him on Saturday instead. But it just didn't line up, and that was that. Content-wise, it's okay. Things are continuing on. Things are building up. It's hard to say for certain how I feel about this arc overall. I do know that there were a couple moments in this show where I'm like, these characters kind of forgot how gravity works, haven't they? And I'm not going to comment on why. It was just a couple of silly things, but there are a couple of silly things in here that, you know, worked out, and for the most part, I think I mentioned being a bit fatigued near the beginning of this season or story arc, whichever it was I was calling it. And, you know, this is fine stuff. For this to be really good, it usually needs to end in a way that makes me feel like something bigger than the world is... Like, One Piece has been pretty amazing because it's not afraid to try strange and weird things, and it's not afraid to go directions with those that are then unexpected. like I mentioned with somewhat recent stuff, there were even things that looked like they were foreshadowing things that were going to happen that they never did, but there were other things that they showed that kind of imply things that have never been addressed, and it's strange. It's strange, and maybe they could still address that stuff because they are still within the bounds of that super overarching story arc. But it's really hard to tell. But where it's shown the strongest is this feeling of the world being so big, where there are parts of it that you're like, oh yeah, that thing, and they connect it, and some of that's happening here, of course. But then there's big overarching story arc where it kind of feels like there's something even bigger than the big stories that our characters are dealing with their small stories along the way. So all those layers of stories are kind of what makes One Piece interesting. And I'm kind of curious if they're going to do anything like that or not, because it's been a while. But, otherwise, just watch it until I see what happens. And last but not least, I watched some Inspector. I still have this in the player, and nothing that arrived today is going to interrupt it, so I'm going to continue watching it, but it's an interesting series. It doesn't feel like it's, specifically strong in something that makes you go, oh my god, I gotta watch this, but instead more like eating a pleasant meal, and it just sort of keeps going and being pleasant. You're like, this meal's going longer than I planned, but I kind of enjoy this, so it's good. I know that's there's some shows like that. I think, Mumushi? I'm blanking if that's even really the name of a show right now. The one with the guy and all the strange kind of spirited things. I mean, this is a show that kind of deals with some of that stuff too, but there's a kind of... That one is definitely a lot more episodic, whereas this one looked like it was setting itself up to be episodic, but instead it's been kind of on a continuum, and it's interesting because even when it ends a story and transitions a time period, it tends to do that in the middle of episodes and not in between, so you don't really have cut up stuff. And in that regard, that's a weakness, because it kind of feels like it would be a really good show if it was kind of episode of the week. Mushishi. Is that what I said before? I don't remember, because that sounds more correct. And if I said that exact same thing before, then... Jesus. Okay, instead, it seems to be dealing with some more overarching thing that... it's again, really weird. I like the main characters, though. And I think the main characters are slightly more than these two, but they did a really interesting job of creating two interesting characters that don't really overpower the show, because they feel a lot more orthogonal and they empower the show in different ways. And their chemistry is entertaining. These two characters and some more characters that they add. It's just all around amusing. I mean, I've even seen one of the clips from this show before, and it's like, oh, yeah, I remember seeing this scene. That was amusing. And I didn't even remember the name of the show from then, but, here I am, happening to watch it and happening to enjoy it and kind of curious where it's going to end. So, I wouldn't be surprised if this is only a season 1, and it kind of ends in a way where it's just like, well, okay, but I bet there's going to be more. And it could deserve to have more, and it could be interesting. There's things I want to see what happened, so it's piqued my interest, and it's easier. It's been held on to. Unlike Kakushigoto, I found it a little easier to just kind of digest a little bit in the background. It doesn't feel like it requires as much attention, which is interesting because the characters do a lot of talking. But I think it's because it's not a comedy, and so it's not leading you through. Instead, it's guiding you. That's a really bad way to explain it. So the comedy kind of grabs you and says, come over here, and come over here, and come over here, in order to do some of its joking, whereas this is like holding your hand and walking along. And it's just interesting. Oh well. Let's see. Other than that, yeah, just playing Dead by Daylight, and I'm enjoying myself. I think last week I had very recently started playing as Killer. I don't remember if I had branched out and tried a couple of other things, but I have. Sometimes just out of curiosity, and sometimes because of the daily rituals. And I'm still a relatively fresh player to the game, and I need to unlock a whole lot of stuff, which is a lot of game time, a lot of blood points, and I'm trying to basically stay on a focus of this is a game that encourages competitiveness, and I don't like being competitive, and so instead I'm just trying to find my enjoyment without being competitive. And I think that's why playing Killer started becoming necessary, because if it's Survivor, I mean, there's no way I'm going to be a top tier player on YouTube. If I ever show up on YouTube, either it's going to be because someone's laughing at me, or maybe there's something else where it's just like, here's a guy who loses as Survivor again. It's just like, oh well. I mean, I was on the hook from first hook to death, but I could see what everybody else was doing, and I'm like, it's fine. Even if he wasn't camping me, he was chasing two of you, and the third one couldn't get past the killer in order to get closer to me to help me, and that just happens sometimes. And I'm aware of some of the stuff we might need to focus on in order to not do that, but at the same time, I don't want to focus on that stuff too much, because some of that definition is like, okay, yeah, it means that I, as a Survivor, am not going to be allowed to focus on any of the Survivor tomes or Survivor daily rituals. So, I guess I just have to accept my deaths, my losses, and just be acceptable with my meager blood points that I get doing that. I get a lot more playing as a Killer. It pretty much doesn't matter as a Killer. Like, just before recording this video, I was playing as Oni, because I had the daily ritual to hit people with the fatal thing. And, of course, the rating system is based on your Killer and the average of the thing, usually. I mean, I think if you're waiting around, there's a chance that you're going to get matched with something that's not quite right. You might be an overpowered Killer, or they might be an overpowered Survivor team. But in this case, it felt like, there was some balance. And about the only thing I really didn't like about the game was that, learning to hit people with the big one-hit attack is hard. So there was one time I somehow snuck up on a... this was Haddonfield, which is a bunch of houses, and I snuck up on a Survivor who was in a generator room with only one door, so I'm just like, sorry, I'm going to stand in this doorway and smash you with the club. And I ended up in a situation where I ended up trying to do that to her again, but I knew that at that point that she had already been hooked twice, so I was definitely not going to hook her. I was either going to leave her there or pick her up and let her struggle free. Because I just had the goal of at least getting 4 of those in, and I just wanted to give the survivors a little bit of a challenge. And, it was fun. 3 of them got out, 1 of them died. In fact, the one that died didn't die because I was trying to kill him, but because I guess I lost track of how many times I hooked him, which is unfortunate because he probably felt tunneled, but I don't think I did that. I guess I thought it's possible I only hooked him once before, and maybe he was on the other side of the map, and he reached second stage really quick. Maybe he tried to escape or something like that. I probably should have checked to see if he was maybe the survivor that brought a little extra luck, which would not have helped him get off the hook, because it's a rare chance. Rare chance. And I don't know. But, for the most part, I'm not trying to get all the killer perks that I really want to be unlocked. I'm at least trying to come up with a small set of builds, 2 builds, a blood point farming one, and the one I'm kind of aiming for right now, because if I just focus on the blood point stuff, I suspect I'll eventually just be overwhelmed. It'll probably start matching me with people that I just can't handle, and I'm not getting as much blood points, and I'm like, okay, I want to mix it up. Well, I want to give myself the ability to mix it up, so that's kind of what I'm working on, and then I get to switch back to focusing on leveling up survivors, because I've been putting all these blood points into killers, and I kind of consider myself a killer main, but I know I don't have the killer mindset. I think a lot of people that talk about this kind of talk about these killers that are secretly survivors, a kind of Scooby-Doo ghost reveal. It wasn't a ghost, it was really a survivor the whole time. And I can kind of understand and respect some of that, because I'm not playing to win, I guess. For me, winning is everybody comes out of there with a lot of blood points. And some people, I understand, might not be aiming for that. They really want the thrill of the chase and, oh, I got this killer they focused on me while all my allies did gens. And hopefully, I get the feeling that a lot of these people aren't as in the heads of other people as they think they are. So, like, they might not understand that I'm deliberately no longer patrolling generators because, you know, if I just get you, you're the last person to hook, and I get the final mark on my barbecue and chilling. I don't even look for the survivor auras whenever I hook people. I just hook and wander away and, you know, do my normal thing. I'm going for the blood points. And so if they don't understand that they didn't necessarily trick me into doing a thing, then I don't know. And it's really weird because you'll see plenty of those people like do the butt taunt on the way out the gate, and you know, I think people make a good point about not giving them what they want by not going to the exit gate, but for me it's about, you know, going there, and if they're just going to sit around and let me hit them one more time because they want to taunt, then whatever. I just want them to get out the door. And it's interesting because, you know, I've talked before about how there's a lot of things people kind of have general problems with, but they're not always problems, but there are intersections with them. Like, I think the example I had was people with anime body pillows, and my point has always been that there's nothing necessarily wrong with having that, but there is something wrong with wanting to get married to it, because at that point, you are kind of stepping outside of a line of reality. Like, it's not a living, thinking. It's not living at all. It's not thinking. It's not breathing. It's a pillow with, you know, pretty artwork on it. And I know you want to be able to have a relationship with that character. And maybe if people are just doing it for the lulz, they're still good. But for the most part, if you're not doing it for the lulz, then you're no longer properly attached to reality, I guess. And I think plenty of people pick up on that, and that's why a lot of people, you know, are just disgusted by it in general, because it's just like, oh, well, yeah, even if you're using it as a self-satisfactory aid, I mean, how's that any different from watching a video? Because it's not like the people in that video actually really care about your gratification in that regard. It's really just, there's a whole lot of fakeness and falseness to it, and sometimes entertaining yourself is about letting that degree of I forget what it was called. It's not cognitive dissonance. It's when you let a obviously fake narrative be true just for the sake of enjoying the moment, which is something, suspension of disbelief. And again, you know, it's the same thing here. It's kind of sad that some of these people maybe, because Dead by Daylight encourages people to get competitive, it draws in these people who feel like they need to be competitive and they need to be better than everyone else. And so maybe they feel like, haha, I outsmarted that pyramid head because of all the loops I did, when I didn't really care about being looped, because I wasn't trying to win the loop. I was just trying to eventually catch you. Hey, you kept me away from generators for a minute. That's fine. I got the hook for you. That's another 25% blood points for me. In the end, you know, barbecue and chili, nice and great. And I'll go and hunt someone else. I won't camp you to make sure you get there. I won't even come back to check you unless there's a strategic reason to do that. As in, like, if somebody gets unhooked, I might come back and check on them if they were right next to a generator that was being worked on, just to get them off that generator. But that's usually just to try to keep the match going, because I'm not trying to kill people per se. I say per se, but the one thing I definitely have trouble resisting is sometimes it's like, oh, it'd be nice to kill them. It gets really easy when 3 of them are dead and there's 1 person left alive, because at that point it's just like, well, the only reason I would ever do a 4K is because I specifically have objected to do a 4K. And I intentionally don't take that one because I kind of don't want to do that. I know as a survivor, it's really great to be at least the one person that gets out, and it's great when more people get out. And I've mentioned before that sometimes I'm like, okay. So I think I learned that there's this term called swiffing, which is SWF, or Survivor with Friends. It's called swiffing, and some people don't like it at all, because when you got a lot of really good survivors who are swiffing, they communicate well enough such that things just get done. And this can be especially problematic for newer killers, and when stuff like that has happened, one time I stayed behind because I'm like, yeah, I remembered last time thinking this afterwards, so this time I'm like, no, we just swift this person really bad. And I didn't think of it in those terms because this was 2 weeks ago before I learned the term, but I'm like, alright, I'm actually going to stay and let them kill me. You know, it's kind of a sorry that we had an advantage that the game doesn't naturally give to you. And I've seen really good points that swiffing shouldn't really be... They shouldn't really be doing things in order to discourage it yet. The real problem is that you have solo queued survivors and swiffers who are, you know, in a group, and so those groups can communicate. And the problem is the playstyle differences are very wide, and I think it's a really good point that what they need to do is they need to bring the bottom up so then they can slide that down and come up with the middle. Like, I think that's a really good point. And the other real good point, which definitely applies for me, but I don't know if it applies for everybody else in my group, is there's a good point that a lot of the people who swift are really just more casual people who aren't out there to win, which basically means that, you know, if you're a high-rank person or you're being ranked against high-rank people and you get high-rank swiffers, they're probably swiffing to, you know, win. Sort of like some of the stupid butt faces from Sword Art Online and the Gun Gale Online stuff. And I definitely fall in that category because I'm very casual in my survivor play. It's not that I don't try to do stuff, but right now I'm just stuck as Claudette just because, you know, if I play as anybody else, I'm going to have absolutely no perks, I'm not going to have any visibility, no ability to do anything, and I already kind of, you know, tend to, well, I've noticed lately that I tend to be, you know, this isn't like 90% or anything like this, but I have a slight tendency to be the only person that doesn't get hooked if there's one person on our team like that. Up to the point where it's just like, oh, now they finally found me. And so, like, I remember a game where it's like, everybody else had 2 hooks. No hooks on me yet. I've been freeing people from hooks and healing people where I could and stuff, but, you know, I'm a little sneaky little Claudette that, you know, blends into the scenery really well and can self-heal and all that silly stuff. And I want to break out of that, but again, I need to spend blood points to do that, and I especially need to start targeting perks that other survivors have so that I can open them up, and I really want to play as Cheryl Mason. And Cheryl Mason should be interesting because when it comes to Claudette being not very visible, Cheryl Mason is kind of an opposite. I say kind of because she has cosmetics that can make her pretty dark and hard to find, especially her Alessa Gillespie outfit. Yeah, I spent the money to get all those outfits. I would say for some reason, but not. The real reason is you know, just a Silent Hill fan. Enough so that I should probably also get some more stuff for Nurse, except that her basic stuff is the most Silent Hill stuff that she has, in my opinion. But, you know, that's a side story. It's interesting, and the things to get stepping away from this is, I think there's a couple of different kind of toxics in the community, and part of it does come from the competitiveness and what tweaks behavior tends to do or not do or whatever. that maybe causes people to say, well, the only way I'm going to go up in my ranking system is by catching somebody and then camping them and making sure they die. You know, they're okay with that one, maybe two deaths, and everybody else escapes. And, you know, I don't do stuff like that because I think a lot of people call it bad manners, but, you know, for me, it just makes it not as fun for that one survivor on the hook. Some people are competitive enough that they really like that because, hey, if you're going to sit here staring at me, then all my allies are going to get generators. Which to me doesn't make a lot of sense because you're still going to be the first one eliminated. And you're not going to have done any generators and not a lot of points for running per se. I mean, maybe some if you looped them a good amount and made them really pissed off or something. But, you know, you're still going to be getting barely any blood points. And that comes up to the second problem, which is the way a lot of people talk about the game kind of ignores the problem that you have to spend a whole lot of time as a really new person without a whole lot of these things that they talk about like you should have. And I think some of them, when they talk about it, are very aware of it, but others, I get the feeling that they aren't quite there. So they could be good metagamers, but they don't realize that the game is just really, it's barely friendly to any new people starting. Even this ranking system that should be putting you up against killers who are really new, I mean, that just means you're probably going to be up against me. And I'm not, like, really great at the game or anything, but at the kind of levels I play at, you know, I can catch the survivors if I want to. If I wanted to tunnel, I could do that. I deliberately stopped sabotaging generators at some point because I want the survivors to, you know, make progress. I am playing a set that's all about farming blood points and not about making the game go on till eventually I win or anything like that. So it feels to me like, compared to a person who just started Survivor no matter what, would not do very well against me. And I don't know if that's just... I think there's something that clicked in the head just because I've played enough Survivor to have been on that end. You know, it was only a week, but it was enough to, you know, finally get a better grasp from there. And as Killer, when I started playing, I'm like, oh wow. When all these people are new, they don't know that their scratch marks make it really easy to find them. They go off to hide, but, you know, their scratch marks run right up to a locker. And they ran into it and made a loud noise notification, so... Hi there. And pretty much almost doesn't matter which killer I play, just because I can catch up to these people at these levels just fine. I mean, the killers are all faster than the survivors, so it's more like the survivors don't outplay me enough such that... Like, I played the Hag only once, and... Unfortunately for the survivors, it was a really good map for her. It was the Gideon Meat Plant. And the reason it's good for her is because I was able to put traps at all the generators. And because they were new enough that they didn't know how to deal with the traps, and none of them had flashlights, so they wouldn't have been able to do that to get rid of them. It's mostly you have to know that you can crouch when you're around her traps. Now, I don't know what happens if you start working on a generator when in the vicinity of her trap, because, you know, maybe that gets you out of a crouch state and that sets it off. And then in which case, you know, it's the same problem. I'll just teleport to that thing. Those survivors got way more obliterated than I thought they would. As in, like... I killed 3 of them, and I was trying to help the last one get to the hatch. And this is their outplay. So, like, even though my goal was to get them to the hatch, they managed to find the hatch before I managed to find them to knock them out and bring them to the hatch. And the unfortunate thing about that is they knew perfectly well that I knew where the hatch was, because in order to get to the hatch, they had to trigger 6 or 7 traps that I had laid next to it. It should have been absolutely fucking hilarious. Hopefully they enjoyed that escape, but it was still the situation where I found the hatch first. I could have just closed it and then started patrolling, you know, the 2 exit gates. They're not very far from each other, and on a small map like that, again, the reason it's good for Hag is because There is a distance element to how far she can teleport to one of her decoys when the trap is sprung, but on getting on Meat Plant, you can almost always reach them. You can teleport to any one of them at any time. So, the other problem being, of course, that, you know, the level 1 hag, but Hex Ruin's pretty fucking strong. Especially if the survivors don't know how to find the totem that's doing that, and they spend all their time running around because there's fucking hags everywhere. And, yeah, again, the mindset analyzing that isn't, oh, I'm really great at the game. It's, there's something in my brain that clicked well enough with killers that is probably slightly above a killer that had just started, but I can already tell that at higher levels I'll get my ass kicked. And that's at the point where I'll probably start switching away from blood point stuff because I might not be getting enough hooks, and I'll just start making things painful by sabotaging generators all the time and everything's exploding. And they'll probably be able to deal with that because at that level they're probably really good at making those great skill checks. Not the great skill checks, the difficult skill checks. I don't know. I've blabbed on. Obviously, I just have a lot of Dead by Daylight on the brain. It's got a lot of stuff to process, and you spend a lot of time trying to set stuff up so you can play around with some of these things that you process to see what does and doesn't work for the way you want to play. So, since I haven't gotten to play them, I'm definitely not at a pausing or stopping point just yet. Oh well. Anyways, y'all, have a nice week.